With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello there, you're with GB News. In a moment, headliners, but first let's bring you the latest news headlines. And MI5 has increased the terrorism threat level in Northern Ireland from substantial to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. That comes roughly a year after Britain lowered the threat level for Northern Ireland for the first time in more than a decade. The Deputy Chief Constable Mark Hamilton says the Police Service of Northern Ireland is working hard to make the community safer. Also in the news today, Prince Harry says the royal family, without a doubt, withheld information from him about phone hacking by News Group newspapers. He made the claims in a witness statement submitted before his civil claim against the publisher of the Daily Mail Associated newspapers. Prince Harry is among a group of celebrities launching legal action against the publisher, accusing them of numerous breaches of privacy. Associated Newspapers denies all the allegations. In the United States, President Joe Biden has called on Congress to pass an assault weapons ban after a school shooting in Tennessee, saying the country owes the families action this time, not just prayers. For viewers, a warning: you may find the following footage distressing. In the incident, 6 people, including 3 children, were killed in Nashville on Monday. Police shot and killed the 28-year-old transgender former pupil, saying the attacker had bought 7 firearms legally, 3 of which were used in the shooting. Here, the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he has every intention of representing his constituency, Islington North, at the next general election, adding he won't be intimidated into silence. That's after Labour's National Executive Committee approved Sir Keir Starmer's motion to block Mr Corbyn standing as a Labour MP. Mr Corbyn was suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party in 2020 over his reaction to a damning report into anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. He could still, however, run as an independent. Now, the Education Secretary is urging teaching unions to accept the latest pay offer and end their industrial action. The government's offering a £1,000 one-off payment as well as a 4.5% pay rise for next year. But the National Education Union has recommended its members reject the deal and instead hold further strikes on April the 27th and May the 2nd. And lastly, the SNP leader Hamza Yusuf has now been officially selected as Scotland's new First Minister. Runner-up Kate Forbes has said she'll support Mr Yusuf despite rejecting his offer to serve in the cabinet. Ms Forbes, who previously served as Finance Secretary, was offered a demotion to Rural Affairs. She'll now return to Holyrood's backbenches. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Time for headliners.
Hello, good evening. I am Simon Evans. Welcome to Headliners. Joining me tonight to take you through the best of Wednesday's top stories, we have top comedians Leo Kearse and Roger Monkhouse. How are you both?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Very well, thank you.
Marvellous. Let's have a cracking look at the front pages then. The Daily Mail has migrants to be housed on cruise ships and barges. Sounds all right, doesn't it? The Guardian has Guardian owner apologises for founder's links to slavery. The Telegraph has petrol car ban in chaos after EU meltdown. The Times, hundreds of migrants to be housed in giant barge, sounding a little bit more like the Dickensian hulks in Great Expectations. The Eye have Lineker 1, taxman nil. He has managed to evade the evasion suit. The Daily Star, boffins don't call us boffins. Eggheads plea to get Daily Star's favourite word in world banned. Well, those were your front pages. So let us kick things off with the front page of the Daily Mail. Yeah.
So they've got ministers pledging to house cross-channel migrants on barges moored off the British coast, as well as ex-military bases and disused ships. This is in an attempt to slash the taxpayers' £3.5 billion bill for hotels for cross-channel migrants. Apparently there's 50,000 people in 400 hotels. I don't know, it sounds like a good deal. £3.5 billion is about what you'd pay for a family of four to go to Centre Parks during the holidays. But yeah,
£150 a night, apparently, for each individual asylum seeker. That seems a lot, frankly, doesn't it? I mean, surely you get some sort of deal going,
even for government procurement, that sounds like they're paying over the odds.
I stayed in a travel lodge at the weekend for 30 quid. It seems as the going rate.
Well, you're quite right. They've been stung, haven't they? Because if you go to any of the aggregator sites or whatever they're called, you know, like the not TripAdvisor, the
Booking.com and such like,
the price of hotel rooms fluctuates according to demand, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of demand right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of demand.
Although if anybody's worried about their taxes being spent willy-nilly, this is actually coming out of foreign aid. So it boggles my mind that, you know, left-wing people are like, oh no, we need to have, you know, as many people coming across the channel as possible, and the money to house them is coming out of foreign aid. So basically, left-wing people want us to pay for Albanian men to stay in hotels here instead of paying for water in Africa.
Well, it's always been the case.
Die.
It's always been the case that the British government is better actually at providing help for refugees closer to the actual catastrophe, whether it be a war or a famine or whatever, and less good perhaps because it's further away at actually housing those or welcoming those in who travel away from the catastrophe.
It is.
But it invests a lot in sort of camps and so on quite near the...
It is a political choice, of course, and it's an accounting thing when you're stripping the foreign aid budget to pay for the hotels. I mean, it's an obscenity that it's going to hotels, although domestic hoteliers are making a lot of money out of it. So, in a sense, it's reinvesting in the economy, isn't it?
I mean, at some point, it will become sufficient of an incentive, I suppose, for people to start buying up places and opening them and then making them available for that sort of thing. I mean, it's not going to...
Incrementally, marginally, that's exactly what will be happening, of course.
Well, the plan is to disincentivise people coming across the channel in the first place. So, I mean, at the moment, they're having adverts played. The people traffickers are playing adverts on TikTok saying, come to Britain, you'll stay in this amazing 4-star hotel with a spa and all the rest of it. So if instead they're staying in a barge moored off the coast of Britain before being sent to Rwanda, it's not going to be as enticing.
I think they should show them the first sort of 15 minutes of Great Expectations, the recent very dark adaptation in which you see Magwitch sort of breaking off the prison, and maybe they'll get a sense of what awaits them there. You know, a few rats and a bit of burning straw underfoot might just be enough of might just tilt the balance away, stay on the north of France.
There are a lot of disused MOD facilities all around the country as well, and there, I understand, are being looked at as viable sites. And of course, there's a civil unrest element to this as well. The government's quite rightly and understandably very keen to take the migrants or the asylum seekers away from the city centres, which are, of course, now attracting the demonstrations from all sides.
Right. Let's have a look at the Guardian front page now, Roger. This is a little bit of navel-gazing.
Lorks a lordy. This is the Guardian embarking upon an orgy of hand-wringing regarding its own founders' connections with the slave trade. It's a brilliant advertisement for the investigative journalism skills of the Guardian that it's taken them 150 years to uncover this. What can I say? Well done, them.
The beam in their own eye has been cast out, finally. Yeah. I mean, I suppose if we're to maintain any kind of ethical consistency, we should say, oh, you know, don't be contorted with guilt over something that last took place. But there is a certain amount of schadenfreude as well.
Well, yeah, the Guardian is constantly lecturing everyone else on racism and microaggressions and the terrible history of the British Empire and all the rest of it. And it turns out the whole time, not only were they founded by slave traders, people involved in the slave trade, but they were paid by the British government to end slavery. The Guardian didn't want to. The Guardian's owners didn't want to end slavery, so they had to take money from the British taxpayer. And we only just finished paying that off, I think, in about 2014.
Yes.
We're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Oh, the recompense to slave traders, not to slave traders, to slave owners was enormous, of course, and it came directly from government coffers.
Yeah.
Which was probably, you know, the best way to do it, in fact. I mean, given that it was they regarded it as an economic problem as much as, you know, we look back at it now as a purely moral one, and that's the way that history works, isn't it?
As with nationalisation, it comes from ultimately from the taxpayer. And the interesting thing about empire is individuals got rich, but countries didn't necessarily. So, of course, the British taxpayer ended up paying for the military interventions and the security, but they didn't take the privatised profit.
Well, that was the thing, wasn't it? After the Second World War, what they said was that we could no longer afford to keep an empire, which does suggest that it wasn't actually just... I thought this empire was supposed to be running at a profit, but no.
Niall Ferguson points out that the richest countries in Europe, particularly the Scandinavian countries, weren't involved in empire, and the poorest countries in Europe, Spain and Portugal, very much were.
It was very much an evangelical mission, but we're destined to be misunderstood. I think the other interesting thing, made to look back not quite so far, I believe that the only reason the Guardian is even remotely financially viable is due to the sale of Auto Trader by its parent holding company. If I remember that correctly, despite their commitment to climate change.
And also, I mean, capitalism saved, stopped slavery because there's no productivity increase. You can't invest in productivity increase with slavery. It's very much capped at what a human being can do.
I mean, people say, there are some people who try and whitewash the whole of the American Civil War and say, oh, it wasn't anything to do with slavery, it was to do with civil rights, but states' rights and so on, and self-determination. But it is always more complex, and it was something to do with an appreciation of the fact that the economic policy of the whole of America seemed to be very much more driven by the industrialised North than the rural South, as they would say it, rather. So these things are always slightly more complex. But anyway, well done, The Guardian, for owning up. Onto the front page of the Metro now, Leo, and this is headline: callous NHS run like mafia.
Yeah, so they've got something about the NHS. We're not talking about that though. We're talking about above the face of evil. They've got the picture there of Audrey Hill, the trans shooter who perpetrated the school shooting yesterday. Former pupil at the school, and a female to male transition, which was quite convincing apparently, because obviously mindless violence is traditionally a masculine, a male trait. But what's interesting is a lot of the coverage of this has focused on the sort of misgendering and the appropriate gendering of the perpetrator. CBS tweeted that they were on the scene and they were trying to ascertain the gender of the shooter, which seems bizarre, as if the next season of CSI Nashville is just going to be forensic experts picking through the debris to find pronouns. And also, it doesn't really matter. I don't think you can worry about... Preferred pronouns are a politeness thing, and you don't need to worry about being polite to somebody who's massacred children.
And is indeed dead.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the
police have rushed in and shot through the head, of course.
I mean, the other thing that I've noticed, which is, I think, even more distasteful, is that a good deal of American media has immediately asked whether this has been effectively caused by the anti-trans legislation in Tennessee and so on, and a sort of climate of hatred towards trans. In any other shooting, you would always say, has this been caused by the shooter being emboldened by a wave of in this case, would be anti-Christian or anti-educationalist or whatever.
Which there's plenty of evidence. There's a cult of victimhood in the gender woo-woo cult, and they demonise people as Nazis and excuse violence against them. And also there's the fact that she was given hormones to transition to being a man. So testosterone one of the side effects is aggression, violence, impulsiveness.
It's quite interesting that I've seen a couple of people say, just again online, is it more dangerous if you get a sudden surge of testosterone at that point in life, when you haven't sort of been socialised, when you haven't been conditioned by the expectations? Boys, when they go through puberty up to the age of about 22, 23, are experiencing that kind of aggression, and society knows how to kind of go, I know, boys will be boys, but there are limits. You get knocked down and pushed back to an extent. If you suddenly experience that in your mid-20s, I don't know, maybe there are...
I can imagine that might be a factor, and yet, as far as we know, there's no evidence to suggest that this is anything other than a red herring. I mean, it's one of many shooting incidents. It's a commonplace.
But there have been four. There's a lot of evidence. There's been 4 shootings. It's 4 mass shootings by people who are either transgender or non-binary. So the Colorado Springs, Denver, Abercrombie, Aberdeen and Nashville mass shootings.
Yeah.
But the whole troubled people now hang their hat upon a contemporary issue, which is body dysphoria. And so perhaps it's not so remarkable, is it?
I think
troubled people who do things like this are also part of that whole
seeking
debate.
Self-diagnosis.
Exactly.
I think
we need to move on. I'm terribly sorry, but we have to address the Daily Star's front page before we go to the break.
Oh, well, of course, this is the Daily Star being, in fairness, as droll as it ever is, with the headline, "Boffins don't call us boffins. The Institute of Physics demands a rethink from your science-loving star." But we think the mega brainiacs have got this one badly wrong. This is the paragraph that's worth the pay of the sub-editor today, and that is, "Boffins want to ban the word boffins because they say it is stopping young boffins from becoming boffins." But for once, we think the boffins are wrong.
Marvellous. Well, hopefully boffin phobia is still capable of being reined in. Those are the front pages. Coming up after the break, we've got Corbyn, J.K. Rowling and Andrew Tate. What a lineup. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans, still joined by top comedians Leo Kearse and Roger Monkhouse. So Leo, Mirror is to kick us off with this section. It looks like it's on for the showdown of the century.
So Jeremy Corbyn is officially blocked from standing for Labour at the next general election. So Labour's governing body, the National Executive Committee, signed off a motion not to endorse the former leader. So he can still stand as an independent. He's posted a statement on Twitter saying, "I will not be intimidated into silence." It's like, you're not. You just can't stand for the Labour Party. And, maybe you would be able to stand for the Labour Party if you'd accepted the AHRC's report on anti-Semitism and tried to expunge anti-Semitism from the party and from Momentum. And Momentum is his political group, and it's absolutely chock full with just the most vicious sixth form anti-Semites.
It'd be interesting to see how this plays out, though, doesn't it? Because the narrative before the transition was that Jeremy Corbyn's lot, Momentum, had taken control of the party and that it would never be released from its vice-like left-wing grip. Now, that clearly hasn't been the case, and it's a real question, this. It's a muscular move, isn't it, by Keir Starmer, clearly. And it'll be interesting to see how much power he does have in the party. He's riding high in the polls. I presume he's taken this moment to swoop and to cut all connections with Jeremy Corbyn. Of course, he served under Jeremy Corbyn quite happily for a long time, and it's a Tory line of attack that he is associated with Jeremy Corbyn. So it's perhaps an indication of his paranoia about that line of attack that he's so keen to disassociate himself.
Well, I think they will have an opportunity to sort of unpick the rationalisation of Corbyn being thrown out, because they've had to find things that Corbyn has done since Starmer took over, things that Starmer didn't serve under and not flag up at the time. It's quite difficult. Obviously, there's a certain amount of technicality there. And I think that, it's something Starmer is good at, obviously, as an ex-lawyer, and I'm sure he's made it reasonably robust. I suppose the other question now is whether Corbyn does stand as an independent and whether he'll carry the day in Islington.
Well, Ken Livingstone did in the 90s when he was
Absolutely.
And then he came back into the fold and came back into the Labour Party and ran his became
interesting that was redemption in the end, and he came back. But I suspect that Jeremy Corbyn might just end up with an ice pick in his head.
He'd probably appreciate that.
It'd be a wonderful legacy, wouldn't it? It would be the ultimate martyrdom. He'd really enjoy that.
That is, it would be in a way sort of quite, as well as being quite Trotsky, it would be quite Islington as well, wouldn't it? Squaring that circle. Roger, more Labour news now in the Times as we wait to see just how much of a direct hit the SNP has struck on its own foot.
This is interesting. This is, of course, Labour's aspiration, Labour's great hope to collect SNP seats up in Scotland. Labour has currently 1 MP in the whole of Scotland, and they reckon they can target as many as 20. That's quite a lot. Well, and that could make all the difference in terms of a majority in Westminster, of course. Under
Blair, in at the height of their power then, they had about 50, I think, didn't they?
It was a received wisdom only 5-10 years ago that Labour would never, ever get a majority again because of Scotland specifically.
Yeah, these things swing so much more wildly than people assume. But I mean, it has been an interesting week for the whole of British politics with the SNP going that way, because now it might mean that Starmer is best to sort of dig in for the long haul. There was, I mean, not that he has any control over the matter exactly, but there might have been a hope and an expectation for Starmer that a general election, the sooner the better, essentially. Yeah. Because the Tories were still rattled following the Truss, Farrago and the Johnson scandal and so on over the summer. But now, the longer Starmer can hold off, I suspect the more chance he has of swinging it in Scotland.
On the assumption that the SNP continue to fragment and collapse as they are.
I think we've seen peak separatism. 30,000 people have left the SNP's membership.
Oh, yeah.
Only 7 in 10 voted in this.
That's amazing.
Which is incredible.
Yeah. And it's an electronic vote. If you're a party member and you can't be bothered to vote electronically, it's an indication of your lack of any confidence at all in the candidates, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Hamza just scraped in 52 to 48. We've seen how that can sow divisiveness, that number.
I was going to say, it's that satanic ratio again, isn't it? Designed, perfected to demonstrate division and dis-ease coming up. I mean, I suppose that's the thing. If he is committed, as he does seem to be, Yusuf, to pursuing, he's the Sturgeon continuity candidate, we were seeing this, right? And he wants to plough straight back into the trans race.
Apparently. Yeah. Which is why Keir Starmer's so keen now to complete his journey and decide that women can't have penises.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he must have a lot of faith in his own charisma. Staying with the SNP leadership, Leo, everyone's favourite contact point with reality. Again, funny how those things go. She sees an early bath ahead for Hamza Yusuf.
Yeah, so J.K. Rowling has said that Hamza Yusuf will disappear through the ice like Nicholas Sturgeon. She made this hilarious.
It's like a mafia.
Yeah, it does a bit.
She's really warming to her role as the Wicked Witch of the West, isn't she? Just turning up.
If it was coming from somebody a bit scarier looking than J.K. Rowling, you might think about what she said. She was responding to a tweet about Mr. Yusuf's support for the gender recognition bill. I can't believe Hamza still supports the gender recognition bill. This is something that brought down Sturgeon. It basically means that anybody can identify as whatever they want, whenever they want. So you can just, if you're being sentenced for a crime, as some people in the SNP might be in the near future, if any of these corruption allegations come true, then they can just say, "Oh, I'm a woman," and go to a women's prison. It's absolute madness.
So why is he pursuing it then?
That's the question. It's an ideological thing. Maybe he's being pushed by party bigwigs and the Greens, but
the Greens are keen on it.
I also know, I do know a few people, sensible people who live in Edinburgh who do believe that he has the soul of a tyrant, which has been manifesting as quite clownish behaviour until now.
Oh, and he's very egotistical and authoritarian.
Rumours of his temper as well are huge. I mean, apparently he's got such a face on him when it all happens and it kicks off.
And he's the architect of the hate crime bill, which is a terrible piece of legislation. He's always suing people for perceived racism. So he seems like the worst person you want as a leader. But so Rowling said Hamza Yusuf is the kid who just saw the skater in front of him disappear through the ice, but yells, "Watch me, everybody," while wobbling straight for the hole. Which I thought is
a different childhood than mine, but it probably rings true. I picture him as in a sort of in a rugby match. He's seen his teammate go down in a hail of bodies. The ball's come free and he just runs straight into it again. It's like, I will get through this time. Nimble-footed, whereas Sturgeon was prodding. Roger, Daily Mail now. Andrew Tate, is he a symptom of asymmetrical schooling?
This is quite interesting. This is an interview. I don't quite understand how this happens, but the Daily Mail is reporting on an interview with Mark Brooks, co-founder of the Men and Boys Coalition, in an interview he's done with The Times, which is a strange cross-dissemination, where he makes a couple of very reasonable points about how young boys are thrown towards or tempted by the toxic masculinity of Andrew Tate, who's obviously vile in all sorts of ways, because they are not nurtured or given an opportunity adequately to exercise those demons in the school environment, which has become so feminised in this day and age, which clearly doesn't serve boys adequately. That's why they're so far behind in examinations. They're outperformed massively by girls and are told constantly, of course, that like some sort of original sin, they're capable of toxic masculinity and potential rapists, every last one of them. And so it's totally understandable that they start playing with knives and getting tempted by the social media nonsense put out by viral people like Andrew Tate.
I mean, he does. He presents the opportunity for them to become superheroes, essentially, doesn't he? Or sort of quite out, like, kind of graphic novel hero figures.
And boys have always loved outsiders. They've all. This is why rap is popular, even though it's musically horrendous. It's popular.
Controlled by massive corporations.
Absolutely.
And it's refreshing.
Notwithstanding that.
It's refreshing to see somebody like Andrew Tate. Not that I agree with all of the things he says and does, but I mean, he's come on. He's just completely rejected all this stuff of like, oh, you must put your foot and walk on eggshells, and all the rest of it. It's so he's like, yeah, you know what? You can just be a man. You can just be a man. And
I don't know.
He's right.
I feel ambivalent about it. I mean, I totally accept what this fella is saying and what Roger's just said. I've watched some of his content, and I think some of it, he makes some interesting points, and some of it, he is just obviously being theatrically, almost pantomimically misogynist and absurd. But I think it's quite interesting. My son is 15. He watched some Andrew Tate, went in and out the other side very quickly, sort of 2 or 3 weeks of thinking it was funny, and then was bored and sort of moved on. I think most kids, you're right, I like to think he's in a reasonable family and a good school, But you can imagine if a kid was, as you say, feeling deprived of a father figure, how you would latch on to somebody like that. It's kind of the role that Jordan Peterson played a few years ago, but that was a lot more intellectually demanding, whereas Tate just sits there with his shirt off and a Maserati revving up in the background.
And kids are quite capable, I think, of exploring this and enjoying it slightly ironically. I don't think they're necessarily followers in the way that liberals fear.
We're going to sneak one last one in before the break now. Nudge news in The Guardian, Leo. The Dutch are trying to dampen down the traditional British weekender.
Boo.
So Amsterdam tells young British men who want a messy weekend to stay away. Apparently the pub crawls and stag doos are making life miserable for Amsterdam's residents. They can't get stoned and take mushrooms in peace. So they're doing these targeted video adverts at British men. Probably the same. They probably come on after Andrew Tate videos, to be honest. Describing the risks and consequences of drug taking, fines, criminal record, hospitalisation, permanent health damage. I mean, Amsterdam is the place that legalised this stuff. Why are they then saying these are the risks? Like, you know, maybe you shouldn't have made them legal. I don't know.
If you build it, they will come.
What did they expect was going to happen?
Slightly insulting. They're only targeting British people thus far, though. I feel slightly slighted by that.
Somebody has said, I can't remember who it was, but some Dutch individual has said, it's a guy called Marco Lemmers, that's right, it's on the notes from Conscious Hotels. He said that if you ever look online at how some of the other countries in Europe regard Dutch tourists, you'll find that we're not so very different. Anyway,
Welsh?
Let us get on to the next break. We have newborns' right to privacy, spitting audiences, and Leo will explain his newfound experiences with plastic surgery. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to Headliner. So the Telegraph now, Roger, and betting shops encourage gambling. Shock horror.
Yes, indeed. A shocking story about William Hill, who are an upstanding member of the community of parasitic monsters that prey upon the weakness and the desperate avarice of the most vulnerable in society, and apparently haven't been observing due diligence in their stripping of their victims. And have been fined consequently by the Gambling Commission a record amount, which is 19 million. Now, I thought that would be a small amount of their overall profits, but apparently their profits fell to not much more than 19 million last year prior to a takeover, interestingly.
Right. Well, hopefully this is tax deductible.
Well, it's interesting. Of course, it is tax deductible, and also I wonder where the money goes when these massive fines come out. Is it a way of filling government coffers? In which case, there's no incentive, really, is there, for the regulatory bodies to actually do their job, actually, because they're complicit in the whole business, aren't they? And they're waiting for the next time when they can levy a fine.
They're kind of taking a punt on it, you might say. They're backing the horse to fall. It is worth mentioning, perhaps, in fairness, that these transgressions were committed under previous ownership, as you say.
Yes.
They have been sold since.
But that was the Guardian's excuse.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Guardian didn't have the wit,
about it.
unfortunately, to deploy that excuse.
So the argument is that people open betting accounts and then were allowed to immediately, lose tens of thousands.
Apparently, literally tens of thousands were gone in hours, and of course, no responsible organisation should allow their punters to do that.
No, I don't know exactly how you stop them, mind you. Well, I suppose you just put a block on their credit card.
I think a lot of them is the fobbed machines, the fixed odds betting terminals in shops, and so then you can put digital caps on what comes off each card and things like that.
Because I always thought betting was mainly a sort of money laundering exercise anyway. It's just where you get rid of cash, isn't it? That used to be the job after you'd done a double at the store and the banana. Anyway, Daily Mail have all the latest in cosmetic surgery trends, Leo. I hope you haven't been squandering your budget too soon.
No. So forget boob jobs or Brazilian bum lifts. They're officially last year. Damn, I didn't get mine in time then. So industry figures show that the brow lift is now Britain's most sought-after cosmetic operation. It costs £5,000, which is quite a lot. You could house a migrant for 3 days for that. And it involves basically cutting away tissue from the top of your face and elevating the brows. And I think it sort of slants your eyes. We're talking about this. It slants your eyes down a little bit, like Sean Connery in You Only Live Twice.
It would be a disaster for me. I would lose my entire USP if I were to have elevated brows.
You might find a whole new side of yourself. Excitedly, you might engage in all sorts of flirtatious eye play.
I don't fancy the idea of anyone sucking the I mean, that's a particularly... Is it right in the eyelid bit, is it?
Well, if it goes
they
wrong...
shave the brow off itself?
I mean, the trouble with anything around your eyes, they've got to be symmetrical, so if anything goes wrong, then it's going to be very obvious to anybody watching.
Well, we got a photo, apparently, of this well-known model, Bella Hadid. I've not heard of her. There she is before, looking normal.
Right.
And here she comes... Oh, my goodness.
Good heavens.
Is that the same person?
I mean, she's obviously had things painted on her face.
Yeah, she's heavily made up as well.
But
those are the fox eyes, and I mean, forgive me for sounding old-manish, but it just looks
awesome.
Odd, doesn't it?
I mean, she's also, there's a slight sense there's a frog eye. Is it called a frog eye? There's a sort of big close-up lens there with a bit of distortion as well, isn't there?
Oh, yes, I see what you mean.
Fish eye. Not frog eye.
I don't know what a frog eye would look like.
Bella Hadid, wasn't she? He was a vampire. No, there was Bella Lugosi.
Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
They may be related.
Oh, well, trends come and go. Good news in the Daily Mail now for drug addicts. It turns out the cure could be more drugs. Roger.
Well, I think, as far as I've understood this story, this is the discovery that an extract from cannabis, CBD, basically, one of the many benefits of this, I think it's specifically in the case of a fentanyl overdose, can be used to stop the patient dying, basically.
Right, not to wean you off.
That's my understanding. Okay. I mean, I was confused about that, and I read between the lines, and I'm still not entirely sure. But as far as I can see, it's something to use at the time of overdose in order to revive and save someone who's OD'd on fentanyl, and that happens a lot in America. The life expectancy in America has dropped by 2 years in the last few years.
Yeah, it's insane.
Because of the opiate crisis. It's extraordinary.
And the trouble with fentanyl is such a tiny amount. It requires are the same amount as 5 grains of sand is enough to kill you, wipe you out.
How do people take it? Is it not injected like heroin?
Apparently they're cutting illegal drugs with it. This is the problem.
Yeah. So some comedians died in LA last year snorting cocaine that had been laced with fentanyl. So, you know, a few grains in there. They put it in pretty much everything. It's all manufactured. Almost all fentanyl is manufactured in China. It's like a soft weapon China's using against the West to destabilise it.
Wow.
So there are lots of people hooked on it as a painkiller, but how it's killing people, I think, predominantly is they're cutting illegal drugs with it. That's my understanding.
Quite impressive that cannabis is powerful enough to
extraordinary.
That.
Absolutely.
Yeah, whatever you say about cannabis, it's not normally considered to be in that league of...
Well, of course, you can't trademark it. This is why Big Pharma aren't too interested, or haven't been.
Although there's a lot of companies making a lot of money from it.
Now.
Yeah, CBD.
Now we go to the Mirror, and they're reporting from Mumsnet, which as always is a font of good common sense. On this occasion, the baby's right to privacy.
Yeah, I mean, this is ridiculous. The baby's 4 months old, so this mum has posted on Mumsnet about how she doesn't want her grandparents changing the baby's nappy because she wants to protect its privacy, and also they changed the nappy without asking consent. You can't get informed consent from a 4-month-old baby.
We used to just mutter to you, can I change the nappy, shall I? Shall we change the nappy? That's all you need to do. And then, consent is then assumed, because if the baby doesn't object...
No, I just say I'm changing your nappy because it smells. It smells. You've done a poo. You've done a poo in your pants. Your nappy's getting changed.
I would have been so grateful if my grandparents had kicked in a bit more often, to be honest, on the nappy changing front.
Exactly. A pushy mother-in-law is something you're very happy to accept in those circumstances, isn't it?
Yeah. And she says she also wants the grandparents to ask consent before cuddling the baby. I'm just amazed that anybody had sex with this woman so she could have a baby in the first place.
She's clearly a bit odd, isn't she? And also overly anxious, as young mothers, young new mothers often are. What she needs is a second or third child, and it all enters perspective, doesn't it?
I remember coming in to find my wife staring anxiously at our firstborn when she was about 6 months old, lying on her back, looking perfectly happy in the cot, and there was a sort of thermometer, like a cardboard thermometer on the wall, and Kate was staring at it, and I said, what's wrong? The baby was fine, not crying, not even awake, and my wife said, I can't work out if she's too hot or too cold. She just assumed there was something wrong.
Absolutely.
Even though there was nothing wrong. And
the whole sale of thermometers or cot-side thermometers is preposterous because babies are very resilient, and of course they've evolved in many different climates to survive whatever the temperatures are.
The idea that they can't exist outside of a 2-degree.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can't. At my age, I should not be expecting to this studio. Anyway, last break now. Join us in a moment for Luke Skywalker helping in the Ukraine extinct mammoth meatballs. That's not what he's serving up in Ukraine, and a challenge as we try and explain the benefits of swearing without swearing. Back in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to the final segment of Headliners. We'll kick off, Roger, with The Guardian. They're reporting on a phenomenon that you and I know all too well.
What, bad behaviour in audiences?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
This is another Guardian article. I'm giving all the Guardian articles, apparently. And this follows a survey by BEC2, who are the Broadcasting, Entertainment, Communications and Theatre Union, which concludes that apparently half of UK theatre staff have considered quitting their minimum wage casual jobs over audience behaviour, which is supposedly got worse since lockdown,
right?
And which is particularly bad. Well, has been particularly bad, induced by alcohol at various events, and everyone's got an anecdote about how they've been badly treated, spat at, etc. A brawl broke out at a jukebox musical involving 20 or so drunk people. It was a dispute over some people singing along to the show. Security police and ambulances were involved. Well, if you're going to pander to the lowest common denominator, then you've got to expect such events, haven't you?
And I think you've probably got to allow people to sing along, haven't you, at jukebox musicals?
Well, I went recently to a performance of My Fair Lady with my daughter, and we sat next to 3 menopausal ladies who insisted on singing along. I was very close to punching one of them at some point, if I'm brutally honest.
My Fair Lady, it's sung by, like, properly... I mean, I don't know. I mean, I suppose this is an artificial distinction, but that is a musical, whereas jukebox musicals are like your favourite pop hits that you sing along to in the car, tied together by a thin sort of, approximation of a plot, aren't they?
Yeah,
and also...
Although Hollywood musicals have always been that, perhaps.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. We kind of perhaps elevate the Gershwin and Porter sort of phenomena differently. I don't know.
But these theatre staff are saying that audiences have been worse since lockdown. Theatre staff have been worse since lockdown. They keep cancelling comedians.
Yes.
For some reason, the fact that they're paid £3 an hour to stamp a ticket means that they think they can curate what happens on stage. Jerry Sadowitz, cancelled, pulled from theatres because staff complained. And it's like it's not their job to decide what art we can see.
Yeah, I do think that was quite specific to the Edinburgh Festival, where they're always struggling to find hospitality staff, and they do feel slightly in hock to them. They're held hostage a little bit by temporary summer staff.
Well, hopefully we can replace them with robots soon.
I do think it's interesting, though, this one point which they did make, and this is something I definitely do think has changed in Britain over my lifetime, is they mentioned that theatre bar prices, this is their own staff saying this, theatre bar prices are so high now that people start getting tanked up before they leave the house.
They preload, I believe the expression is preload.
And that's also fine if you're just going out for a nightclub in dancing or whatever. You can understand that, but you shouldn't really be that drunk before you get to the theatre.
Yeah, there's also a nugget here as well, which I think might be worth pursuing. This is the fellow who says, I'm sure quite a lot of it's drink-related, blah, blah, blah. I do also think more broadly there is an issue about how society speaks to people in public-facing roles. I think there might be something in that.
Might be. It's probably encouraged by comedians, isn't it? Anyway, Leo, we have iNews now. Actors are helping the war effort the way they know best, at least.
Yes, so Star Wars actor Mark Hamill, he played Luke Skywalker. He's given his voice to an alert app in Ukraine, warning people to take cover when Russian forces, unleash their drone strikes. So it says, attention, air raid alert, proceed to the nearest shelter. Don't be careless. Your overconfidence is your weakness, which seems a little ominous.
Yeah.
And then afterwards...
Is he trying to go for a bit of Jedi wisdom?
Well, that thing there is just starting, but afterwards, when it's safe to go full Jedi, he does. He says, attention, the air raid alert is over. May the Force be with you.
OK.
And they're going to get Harrison...
They lift a little bit more there, yeah.
Yeah, they're going to get Harrison Ford to do it as well.
Harrison Ford, Leonardo DiCaprio, Orlando Bloom. I mean, when Hollywood turns out in force, it didn't help Hillary Clinton much, did it? So you kind of fear for them, don't you, increasingly?
It's nice to see them getting involved with a war instead of just nagging us about our social justice issues or whatever, isn't it? I think AI now can appropriate anyone's voice from the past. They could easily get Yoda or Alec Guinness to join in. I mean, you could have the whole range. I would have thought Darth Vader would have been the obvious one, actually, to get in, because he has that... You would be immediately, captive. You'd hear that voice, wouldn't you? And you would just think that's...
Throwing a bit of Churchill, why not? If you can get anyone, why not?
Boris is as close as we've got to that one.
They love him.
Remember, was it Two Tribes by Frankie Goes to Hollywood? Mine is the last voice you will ever hear at the Proceed to Your Shelters.
Yeah.
I think they should get that one in. A little bit of nostalgia, anyway. Office romance news now, Roger. In the Daily Mail, it seems a simpering laugh is as good a tell as lipstick on your collar. I dare say viewers will be trying to detect that amongst us.
This is the conclusion of a study that apparently newly engaged romantic couples laugh differently in each other's company. And the Daily Mail angle is that your office romance may be given away by your laugh, and it only takes colleagues 2 seconds to notice. When couples start an office romance, they often try their best to keep things under wraps, but not going for lunch together or avoiding lingering looks may not be enough to stop the secret getting out, a study suggests. So, this is the key. Romantic laughter is perceived as more feminine-sounding, more baby-like, more submissive, and this is based upon the emotional volatility and craving associated with romantic love, whereas laughter among friends is a lot more relaxed and bass in tone, I suppose.
Not for the first time. I can't help feeling friendship is a lot more desirable condition.
And enduring.
Yes, the romantic relationship.
Of course. Well, it's basically about anxiety, isn't it? And uncertainty.
Yeah. It is, isn't it? They're almost saying nervous laughter, really, in a relationship. Yeah. Or performative laughter.
This research is important because it underscores that laughter is more nuanced, variable, complex and socially important than most people believe. Professor Farley now wants to study the laughter of long-term couples. Good luck there, Professor Farley.
And what could possibly be used to bring it back? A night at Bella Pasta. What do you think, Leo? Do you recognise this? I've personally never had an office romance, so I've never had to conceal a romance that I was involved in.
I've never measured. I can't remember what the laughter was like, to be honest.
I do remember our boss at work. When I had a job, when I first graduated, I started selling advertising space in Central London. There were a couple of office romances that were common knowledge, but you weren't allowed to address them or acknowledge them because it was out of order.
They're heavily discouraged nowadays, aren't they, by human resources? It's very much disapproved of.
Which is weird, isn't it? Because that used to be like the primary place you met.
How else do you meet people?
Online. There's a reason for getting a job.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the point of getting a job without that?
And of course, the other good thing that used to happen for the gene pool was high-flying executive men used to pick up trolley dollars on aeroplanes and you get a good sort of... Whereas nowadays, high-flying executive men pick up high-flying executive women.
The roles are reversed in porn entertainment nowadays, aren't they? and it's photocopy operators who are seduced cynically by the high-flying ladies.
That's right. Having arrived on time, as everyone always says. Staying with relationship news in the Mirror, Leo, it would be that I think this is what the young folks would call a red flag.
Yeah, so this woman says, I didn't know my boyfriend's name for 4 months.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I was too anxious to ask. And so she was unsure if he was called Patrick or Richard. I'm not sure why. Those are the two that she settled on. Quite different names. So She, after 4 months, she started rummaging around. This is before Facebook and stuff, so she couldn't just look over his shoulder when he's on his phone. So she rummaged through his car glove compartment and found an insurance document and revealed that his name is, I think, Richard.
It was, so she had one of that she was guessing from. One of the two was correct.
Yeah, apparently so. But it did turn out to be a red flag because they divorced.
I mean, that is extraordinary. We've all had those kind of... I've had 1 or 2 friendships or whatever where you miss the person's name.
Oh, yes.
It becomes awkward after a while.
Oh, yes, very common.
4 months of a relationship.
Yeah.
I suppose it does depend how often they saw each other. Maybe in the days before Facebook as well. Maybe he was on the rig for the middle sort of 9 weeks of that or something.
Yeah. Or inside, of course, traditionally.
Yeah. It's a terrible thing, though, isn't it? I'm actually writing my Edinburgh show at the moment about forgetfulness, memory lapses and so on. It's called Have We Met? Because that's the horrible feeling you get in Edinburgh. Half the people you meet up there that come up and they're looking at you in a way that have that kind of hunting...
It's a condition, isn't it?
Yeah, face blindness.
There you go. I mean, there's other names and words for it, but wouldn't it be horrible? It would be like experiencing dementia, wouldn't it?
Brad Pitt says he has it because he doesn't recognise people who come up to him, but that's just because everybody recognises him.
Yeah.
So he meets so many people.
Well, in a tiny way, stand-ups are a bit like that because people approach you looking like they recognise you.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, my God, where do I know this person from? And they're just coming up to say, we saw you the other night. Very good, thank you.
And, of course, you share such intimacies from the stage.
Yeah.
A punter, if they are wrapped up in it or if they suspend their disbelief long enough, of course, believe themselves to be an intimate of yours and you know them not from Adam.
In fact, it suggests you've done your job very well, doesn't it?
Yes.
If you create that
It's a compliment.
for yourself.
If you track cycles.
We used to say laughter was the best medicine, but it turns out it might be swearing, in fact.
Swearing's definitely the best medicine. Swearing does help numb your pain, experts claim. And this is interesting because it directly stimulates, let's see, staring can activate the amygdala, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Which is part of the brain that makes up the limbic system, which is responsible for behaviour and emotional responses. Basically, it stimulates the production of adrenaline, which is nature's own painkiller.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's an experience I've had.
Oh, when you hit your thumb with a hammer, of course.
There's a lovely old joke used to be on Twitter with something along the lines of, to find out the middle name of Jesus Christ, drop a concrete block on your toe. I think men have known this kind of stuff for a long, long time, haven't they? But it is nice to be authenticated anyway. Finally, we've got 10 seconds to say, talk about mammoth steaks.
So scientists have brought mammoth. They're trying to create artificial lab-grown meat, but they're using mammoth DNA, and they say it tastes like reptiles, and we can say that as we've also grown crocodile cells. I'm not eating any lab-grown meat. I can categorically state that.
If we just concentrate on decent burgers, I think we might be on board.
It shows a shocking lack of imagination because without any kind of ethical dilemma here, you could eat people, couldn't you? You could try people for the first time.
Pig,
what an opportunity missed.
The show is nearly over. Let's take another quick look at Wednesday's front pages. Daily Mail, migrants to be housed on cruise ships and barges. The Guardian owner apologises for founders' links to slavery. The Telegraph, petrol car ban in chaos after EU climb down. The Times, hundreds of migrants to be housed in giant barges. And the Daily Star, boffins, don't call us boffins. Eggheads plea to get Daily Star's favourite word in the world banned. Well, that's all we have on our show tonight. Thank you to my guests Leo Kearse and Roger Monkhouse. Headliners will be back tomorrow at 11 with Josh Howie in the hot seat, Louis Schaefer and Nick Dixon. And if you're watching the 5 a.m. repeat, stay tuned for The Breakfast Show just after the break. Thanks very much for watching. Good night.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Is the Governor of the Bank of England right to say that early retirement is forcing up inflation? Are the Labour Party right to try and copy Joe Biden and to outgreen the Tories ahead of the next general election? We find out the truth about what happened in Newquay with violent clashes outside a migrant hotel a couple of days ago. We also ask, how severe is the terrorist risk in Northern Ireland? And joining me on Talking Pints, one of Britain's most recognisable sportsmen, Duncan Goodhue, MBE. But before that very full menu, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News tonight, MI5 has increased the terrorism threat level in Northern Ireland from substantial to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. And that comes roughly a year after Britain lowered the threat level for Northern Ireland for the first time in more than a decade. This afternoon, the Deputy Chief Constable, Mark Hamilton, said the Police Service of Northern Ireland was working hard to make the community safer.
We're not going to be deterred from providing our visible, accessible, responsive policing to the community. We're determined not to go backwards. Northern Ireland has made great progress over the last number of years, as has policing. The threat level was severe for a number of years. Unfortunately, we are somewhat used to it, but it doesn't mean we accept it. It means we have to work even harder to get it to a level that is far more acceptable